All right, so you've attempted your first module, or at least you're going to try to attempt your first module. And what you'll realize with the OSHA module is that it's very common sense, people, right? I mean, let's not walk into a burning vat of fire. Let's make sure that we don't fall into a vat of acid. Let's make sure that we clean up broken glass the right way. Let's make sure that we wear a hard hat when we're supposed to wear a hard hat. These are the things that are going to be explained in the OSHA module. And, honestly, I'm telling you the truth. If you didn't watch any of the videos and you went straight to the assignments, you could probably use a little bit of common sense and life experience to answer the majority of those questions. However, do not take it for granted because there's going to be little nuggets of information presented in those videos, or there's going to be little nuggets of information presented in those articles or in this PowerPoint that will show up on the test. And if you're not ready, you won't be prepared for those. So keep that in mind as you work through the OSHA module. So one of the very first things that I want to do is talk about what OSHA really is supposed to represent and why we talk about it. Now, we typically, for the most of us, want to work in a laboratory environment. This could be a pharmaceutical company, it could be an environmental company, it could be a quality control laboratory, it could be working for Coca-Cola or Clorox, it could be working for forensics, food and beverage, it could be working for cosmetics, just a number of different industries that are out there. But no matter what the industry is, OSHA takes effect in every single company. So if people are hiring workers to come in on site and do a job, this OSHA organization is supposed to protect me as a worker, right? These are the people that are supposed to have my back. So if I'm working for a chemical company and I'm exposing myself to a chemical on a daily basis, OSHA is there to make sure that this work environment is actually safe for me to work in. And that's why we start talking about this in the very first module. So OSHA again stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. That is a definition that you need to know. You want to make sure that you know when someone asks you in an interview, maybe, well, what is OSHA? What's the purpose of OSHA? You can at least tell them what OSHA stands for: Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So they're going to help me be safe, and they're going to look out for my health as an employee of that company. Okay? Now, OSHA regulations have been issued in what we call the CFR. And the CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. I get lazy, other people get lazy. We don't like to write Code of Federal Regulations every time. So for that reason, we abbreviate that with a CFR, and that's what you're seeing down here in the reference. Uh, Title 29 is the specific part of the code that's very important. That tells me where I need to be looking for this information, because this book, it's not just a library book. This book is actually multi-volumes that can take up an entire bookcase, or maybe even couple of bookcases, depending on what you use. And the part is 1910. So this gives me the reference in the code where I need to go to take a look at OSHA and the purpose of OSHA and what they are going to be particular with the employer and the employee. Okay? OSHA was created back in 1970 They've been around for a few years, and OSHA's mission, in big bold letters, is to prevent work-related injuries, illness, and occupational fatality by issuing and enforcing the standards for the workplace safety and health. Okay, so they are looking out for my safety, they are looking out for my health, and they're making sure that I don't die when I'm on the job. That's the purpose of OSHA. All right. Okay, so if you go through this PowerPoint, I'm not going to talk about all of the slides. I'm going to let you go through the PowerPoint and let you read these notes and kind of teach it to yourself in a way. You're going to see all of the things that OSHA begins to regulate. The first one is a confined space, which means if you're claustrophobic, you probably don't want to be in a confined space. It's a very small space that you're working in. There's rules and regulations for that. Electrical safety, if you are working around electronics, or if you're working around maybe electrical wires, who knows what you'll be doing. There's a whole division of the OSHA that looks at electrical safety and talks about the importance and talk about how to take care of yourself when you're working so you don't shock yourself or put yourself into a hospital. Emergency response, so if something happens, what does the emergency crew do? What should they do? How should a company enforce those rules and regulations? We have another slide that focuses on PPE and spill carts. So PPE stands for Personal Protective Equipment. All right, so that's another one of these acronyms that you want to keep in mind. Personal Protective Equipment. These are things like a lab coat, or goggles, or a face shield, or maybe a full-blown hazmat suit like you've seen on Breaking Bad if you've watched that show. Eye protection. Believe it or not, OSHA has very strict guidelines on what safety goggles are and the regulations for safety goggles. Can we use anything? The answer is no. Companies have to abide by certain rules when it comes to safety goggles, and if they do not meet those rules and regulations, they will get fined and maybe be persuaded to shut down. Fire prevention. How do we make sure that we're working in a laboratory and we don't catch the place on fire? And if we do catch the place on fire, what are we supposed to do when it concerns fixing it or letting people know? First aid and bloodborne pathogens. Well, we're working with glassware a lot of times in a laboratory, or we're working with syringe needles many times in a laboratory. And if we poke or prod ourselves, or if we cut ourselves, how do we go about the first aid procedures? Where should the first aid kit be kept? What should be in the first aid kit? All of that OSHA regulates. The bloodborne pathogens, because this could be blood-related injuries, well, we know that there's blood-specific diseases that are there. So how do we handle that? What do we do with anything that has blood on it or that is contaminated with our blood? How do we sanitize maybe those lab benches down or the things that we can't necessarily just throw away? Foot protection, very common if you're working in a chemical plant or a company. You have to wear closed-toed shoes, right? Sometimes steel-toed boots is required, depending again on the company that you work for. So OSHA looks at these types of regulations, they set the mandates, and the company has to follow those mandates. The forklift safety, again, depending on where you work and what you do, you might be driving a forklift. So there's rules and regulations about the forklift, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how you should drive it, how you shouldn't drive it, what kind of people should be driving it, and how many people should be accessed or cleared to drive it. So OSHA has a hand in that as well. Hand protection. Maybe if we're working with hot objects every day, we would need heat-resistant gloves. Maybe if we're working with glassware and we know that this glassware could break, and we don't want to poke or prod or cut ourselves, we would wear thicker gloves to help prevent some of that damage. So that's part of personal protective equipment, PPE, and OSHA has a specific stance on hand protection. Hazard communication, anything hazardous is bad for us, right? So OSHA's come around and said, we have a set of rules that you've got to follow. If you are working around hazardous materials, there should be a proper way on the exposure, and there should be a proper way on how these employees report maybe a spill or report some kind of injury that happens at the workplace. This also includes what we call MSDS sheets, Material Safety Data Sheet, or now we call them SDS, Safety Data Sheet. We dropped the first M off. HazCom plays effect into the hazardous exposures. HazCom stands for Hazardous Communication, and this is how chemical companies really kind of relay the message to you that this chemical is explosive, or this chemical is flammable, or this chemical will eat your skin. There's certain diagrams, there's certain pictures, there's certain coding that goes along with the HazCom. So all of the companies that work with these chemicals typically go through a HazCom training before you're allowed to be released and work on your own. Head protection, these could be anything from hard hats to face shields. OSHA has a part in that as well. Again, these pieces have to be approved. These pieces have to be or follow certain regulations before companies can use them. Hearing, so sometimes we work in a noisy environment and it's very hard to hear our coworkers or our bosses. So if something happens on the job site and it's in a noisy production facility, how do we ensure that all of the other workers know that an injury has happened? So OSHA, again, has a hand in that as well. Lifting, so sometimes we're required to lift heavy objects. It could take 2 people, it could take 6 people, who knows? But there's a proper way that you're supposed to lift, and I think that you've all been taught that in some form or fashion, whether it's in elementary school or high school or maybe in a previous employer. Ergonomics. Ergonomics is basically how we can take our facility and make it convenient for you, right? So are we giving you the proper tools that you need? Is there something out there that's a little bit better? Is the plant structured the right way? Or should we build walls or tear down walls to make this production a little bit safer and a little bit easier? So those are some of the things that ergonomics begins to talk about. Lockout, tagout. Lockout, tagout basically is concerning hazardous materials as well. It's basically lockouts preventing the flow of energy, and tagouts means please don't touch it until we come back and fix it, right? So go through, take a look at that link, familiarize yourself with the definition of logout and tagout. Handling equipment. This could be any type of equipment. It could be a hammer, or it could be an instrument in a laboratory. These are things that we want you to be trained on and want you knowledgeable in, and all of those has some type of hazard associated with them. Some of them might be tiny, but they still have hazards that we have to talk about. As you scroll through, you'll see some of the slides at the end talk about machine guarding and respiratory protection, slips, trips, and falls, and tool safety as well. So again, my advice is to download the PowerPoint, familiarize yourself with OSHA. Why do we talk about it? Why is OSHA there? Is OSHA there to help me? Is OSHA there to put more burden on employers? Is OSHA really just another government body that doesn't know how to manage and doesn't know how to control waste or spending? these are the questions that we're going to be asking. So, are they really looking after my back? Are they really looking over my shoulder? Which one is it? So, that's the story of your government. That's the story of OSHA. And I highly encourage you to download this PowerPoint and then watch those videos and read those articles that are listed throughout the module, and you'll be okay. So this module will be due in 2 weeks. Again,